In the summer of 1847, an American surveyor stood in a stretch of desert so empty that his own notes describe it as land no one would ever want. He was there to help draw a border. Behind him, a war was ending. Ahead of him, a line needed to be placed somewhere across nearly 2,000 miles of mountains, rivers, and sand, and nobody in the room particularly cared where. So they drew it fast, mostly along a river. Then west, in something close to a straight cut through territory most of the negotiators had never seen and assumed never would. Here's the strange part. Less than a year later, gold was discovered less than 200 miles from where that line was drawn on the American side, by pure geographic luck. The people who drew the border didn't know it was there. If they had, the line might have moved. History might have moved with it. That's usually where this kind of story ends. A border almost drawn differently, a resource almost missed, a little historical trivia filed away. But this isn't that story. Because that same line drawn in a hurry by exhausted men who thought they were settling an unimportant patch of desert is now one of the busiest, most economically active borders on the face of the earth. Trucks cross it by the millions every year. Entire cities have grown up on either side of it, feeding off each other like organs in the same body. And somewhere in the last 15 years, that border quietly became more important to the global economy than the border almost anyone was actually watching. So the question isn't why the line was drawn where it was. The question is, what happened to turn a piece of land nobody wanted into one of the most valuable strips of territory on the planet? The answer starts somewhere you wouldn't expect. Not at the border. In the mountains 300 years earlier. Picture central Mexico in the 1540s. Spanish prospectors are pushing north into unfamiliar terrain, chasing rumors of wealth when they find something in the hills of a region called Zacatecas that will shape the next 5 centuries. Not gold. Silver veins of it, running so deep and so rich that within a generation, this single stretch of mountains is producing more silver than anywhere else on the planet. For the next 200 years, silver from these mountains doesn't just make Spain wealthy. It becomes the literal currency of global trade. Coins minted here circulate in Europe, in the Middle East, in Ming Dynasty China, which was so hungry for silver that it restructured its entire tax system around it. A mountain range in the middle of nowhere ends up quietly running the plumbing of the first truly global economy. Now here's the part that should stop you. That mountain range never stopped producing. Today, 500 years later, Mexico is still the single largest silver-producing country on Earth, pulling out roughly a fifth of everything mined worldwide, much of it from the same regions the Spanish found in the 16th century. Which raises an obvious question: does that even matter anymore? Nobody pays for anything in silver coins now. That's exactly the assumption worth testing. Because silver isn't just valuable, it's useful in a way almost nothing else on the periodic table can match. It is the single best conductor of electricity that exists in nature. Better than copper, better than gold. Which means every solar panel manufactured on Earth right now contains a thin layer of it, because nothing else moves electricity through the cell as efficiently. It's threaded into 5G infrastructure. It's soldered into the electronics of every electric vehicle rolling off a production line. The metal that once funded Spanish galleons is now, without much fanfare, one of the materials the entire clean energy transition cannot function without. So picture the shape of what's forming here. A country that has spent 5 centuries as one of the world's most important sources of a single strategic metal sitting on that mountain range the entire time, waiting for the world's definition of valuable to catch up to what was already in the ground. But silver, on its own, still isn't the whole answer. A country can sit on a fortune in the mountains and still barely matter to the rest of the world. Plenty of resource-rich nations do exactly that, disconnected from the buyers who'd actually want what they have, something else. had to happen, something that turned a resource into a relationship. And that brings us to a shape on the map that almost nobody stops to look at properly. Trace the outline of Mexico from above. On the west, the Pacific. On the east, the Gulf. And at certain points, the distance between those two oceans narrows to less than 140 miles, a sliver of land connecting two of the largest bodies of water on the planet. Now ask yourself, what happens when a ship coming from Asia doesn't want to spend 3 weeks and a small fortune squeezing through the Panama Canal? It doesn't have to. It can dock on Mexico's Pacific coast, move its cargo overland by rail in a fraction of the time, and reach the Atlantic side of the hemisphere without ever touching the canal at all. That's the second piece of the puzzle. Not just a country with resources in the ground, a country shaped like a bridge between oceans. But even that isn't the detail that changed everything. The detail that changed everything is the one running along that same 1848 border, the one nobody wanted. Because for most of the last 30 years, the fastest way to get a product onto an American shelf wasn't through Mexico at all. It was across the Pacific. Factories in Asia. Container ships. 6 to 8 weeks at sea. For a long time, that arrangement made sense because labor was so much cheaper on the other side of the ocean that the shipping time barely mattered. Then, over the course of a few years, that math broke. A pandemic froze global shipping lanes overnight, and companies watched factories with full warehouses sit paralyzed because the ships that were supposed to move their goods simply weren't moving. Container prices spiked to levels nobody had budgeted for. Political tension between the United States and China turned tariffs from a background detail into a line item that could swing a company's entire cost structure overnight. And in boardrooms that had spent 30 years optimizing for the cheapest possible labor, a different question started getting asked for the first time. What if the real risk was never the cost of labor? What if it was distance itself? That question has an answer sitting right on the map. Not an ocean away. A land border away. A place where a truck can cross in hours instead of a ship crossing in weeks. A place already connected to the U.S. highway system, already sharing a legal trade framework, already producing the exact materials, silver, copper, a growing list of industrial metals that the next generation of technology needs. So picture what happens next, because this is where the story stops being about the past and starts moving very fast. Factories start relocating, not slowly, in waves. Automakers that once built exclusively in Asia begin opening plants across the center of Mexico. Electronics assembly follows. So does medical device manufacturing, then a growing slice of the semiconductor supply chain, the exact kind of high-value production every country had spent the last several years trying to pull back closer to home. And almost without anyone announcing it, a threshold gets crossed. Mexico overtakes China as the single largest source of goods imported into the United States. Not because Mexico built something new, because the world finally started pricing in the 2,000-mile advantage that had been sitting there since 1848. That alone would be a remarkable ending to this story. But there's one more piece, and it's the one that makes everything else durable instead of temporary. Look at who's actually available to do the work. Across most of the industrialized world right now, populations are aging. China's workforce is shrinking for the first time in generations. Japan, South Korea, much of Western Europe all facing the same demographic wall, fewer young workers arriving to replace the ones retiring. Mexico's population tells a different story. The median age is around 30, a decade younger than the United States. More than a decade younger than China. Which means the exact moment the rest of the industrialized world runs short on workers is the exact moment Mexico has more of them than almost anywhere comparable. Put that next to everything else. A border 2,000 miles long, a bridge between two oceans 140 miles wide. A fifth of the world's silver, still coming out of the same mountains the Spanish found 5 centuries ago. A trade relationship with the largest economy on Earth that keeps deepening every single year. And a workforce that isn't disappearing while almost everyone else's is. None of that was planned. That's what makes it worth pausing on. Nobody in 1848 was thinking about solar panels. Nobody in 1547, discovering silver in Zacatecas, could have imagined an electric vehicle. Nobody drawing a border across empty desert could have predicted that the emptiness itself, 2 oceans, a workable width of land, a long, dry stretch of nothing that turned into a highway corridor, would end up mattering as much as anything buried underground. That's what the title is really pointing at. Not that Mexico has one valuable thing. It's that geography, geology, and history spent 170 years quietly stacking advantages on top of each other, waiting for the rest of the world to need exactly what was already there. The line in the desert wasn't drawn to create any of this. It just happened to enclose it. And now, whether by coincidence or by the slow, patient logic of geography catching up to itself, the world's most important supply chains are being rebuilt directly on top of the land nobody thought was worth the trouble of choosing carefully.